Hi, everybody. This is Ruth Bradstreet with Above the Treeline. Thanks so much for coming to this webinar. I'm going to just go ahead and jump in. I think there's probably still some people joining in, but we're recording this so they can come back and listen later. I am a product manager here at Above the Treeline, which is the company that makes Edelweiss. I also have Joe Foster on the line, who is going to pop in sometimes and add his perspective. Say hi, Joe.
Hey, guys.
If you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat widget in the webinar tools. All right, so what we're here to talk about today is upgrades to your free Edelweiss account, what they are and how they can help you. And this probably goes without saying, but oops, going too fast here. Sorry, I'm not very in control of my
It's gone sentient.
Of my PowerPoint. It's kind of like my Achilles heel here. So what we're going to cover today is really quickly how we use data in general. How can it make your life easier? What can you do with Alpine, which is the upgrade? How is this different from the Summit version? Can someone tell me how to pause this thing? There we go. That's it. So I'm going to go through, sorry to keep flipping the screens around. We do things a little bit differently, so I just wanted to give you some context as to what we mean when we talk about data for analytics. And then I'm going to jump into the most frequently asked question, really, which is, what is this Alpine thing I keep hearing about, and how could it make my job easier? And then finally, I'm going to touch, or we will touch briefly on how this is different from the full version of our Edelweiss Analytics tool, which we call Summit. Being above the treeline, the makers of Edelweiss, we have a kind of a mountain theme going on, even though we're in Michigan, and everyone thinks there's no mountains in Michigan, but actually there are.
I'm in Colorado, though, and it's very mountainous and snowy.
Joe's in Durango, he's in mountain land, so we get to do that. And apparently in the Upper Peninsula, there are some actual mountain ranges that I've never seen. Again. All right. But super quickly, just before we jump into that, I know we have some people here are pretty new to Edelweiss in general, so just as a bit of background, for librarians, Edelweiss is a completely free service, the basic version of it, where you can discover new titles, access review copies, which is AKA ARCs or galleys, before they're published, and network with about 100,000 other book professionals that use Edelweiss. So we have kind of a combination of those. The 100,000 are made up of people like book buyers from bookstores, including Barnes & Noble, but all the indies. Almost all of them use Edelweiss fairly intensely since they work directly with publishers, with the sales reps from publishers in particular. And of course, there's lots of publishers. All the publishers post their catalogs so that you can have access to the latest publisher information through catalogs, and their sales reps use those to create presentations for bookstores. And so do lots of other librarians, book bloggers, and reviewers use Edelweiss. So it's active for a lot of different users, and some of them use it in quite different ways from each other. So it's actually used by about 100% of the major publishers, and that actually extends fairly down the list of publisher sizes. So almost all American publishers use Edelweiss. And it covers about 95% of the US front list titles. So it's kind of a one-stop shopping, and probably everyone's favorite aspect is what I mentioned, which is that many of the new titles are available as review copies that you can download to read before you purchase them for your library or just to read for your own fun reading pleasure. But you know, and seriously, it would also be something that you can, if you're well read, obviously you're in a good position to recommend titles and be a professional at reader advisory and so on. So on top of the free Edelweiss service, we also have analytics services that are add-ons. I know analytics is kind of a scary word in some ways, but really when we talk about it, we just mean data. So in our case, a lot of that data is coming either from other libraries or from bookstores. So we're getting real-time data almost from lots of those clients to tell us what's selling, what's on hand, what's happening in their stores and in their libraries. And we've been doing analytics for many, many years. It was kind of our first product, and you can see this slide shows you a whole bunch of our bookstore clients that use analytics. And we've been working with them even before we had Edelweiss. So that's kind of our thing. So what we're doing now is kind of baking more of that analytics into Edelweiss directly, so that you can, not without necessarily having Edelweiss tools that you would go to or analytics tools that you go to within Edelweiss, you'll be able to sort of see them as you go. So as you do other things in Edelweiss, you'll be able to see those numbers. And of course, with the Summit versions, you'll also have special extra pages. So basically, forever, librarians have been depending on your own ILS data, sometimes outdated lists of top-selling books, your requests, the things that patrons are asking for, and for purchasing a good amount of educated guessing as to what is going to be popular in the library. So a lot of our analytical tools are for aiding in that kind of thing, in collection development, in especially purchasing new titles, or not necessarily brand new titles as in not yet published titles, but new titles to bring into your library to replace titles that may not be doing as well. So helping you see what you need, and also helping you with weeding. So what you need and what you weed, I guess.
I can say too, it can be kind of frustrating to always be chasing titles. You know, like you're just kind of always behind and never quite have the thing that everybody wants. And so just that little bit of extra information to help you kind of stay ahead of that curve, I guess, can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Joe. Thanks for snickering at my joke. For doing that, we have a few different offerings that are targeted at meeting different needs and different budgets, actually. So what we're mostly here to talk about is Alpine, which is kind of a premium upgrade to your Edelweiss account, and it's an individual thing that any one librarian can upgrade to. So a collection development librarian can just sign up for themselves, and you can, with that, you can see how titles are selling and stocked at bookstores across the country or circulating in libraries across the country in nearly real time, meaning we're getting those daily updates. And you can also see pre-orders on titles that are not yet published. And if you want to really vastly improve how to maximize your collection budget, you could upgrade to Basecamp. So you can kind of see on our graphic here, we've got the 3 levels being various stages of mountain climbing. So Basecamp is our in-between version. The big difference with that is going to be that your ILS data will be integrated. So Alpine doesn't require anything. You just can sign up and be in there and get access to information. Basecamp and Summit both are ones where we need to get a feed of ILS data. We're working closely with a number of the ILS vendors to be able to get that. In some cases, it's fully automated, but to get that automated and make it easy. And Summit, Basecamp, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about. It's Basecamp is not released yet, and we're still figuring out the details of what it will look like, but it will include your ILS data, and you'll be able to, what that gives you is the ability to compare your collection to what's popular and vice versa. So at the Summit level, you're kind of bringing in a lot of other possibilities. So let me just move ahead here. So Alpine, yeah, like I said, it's easy to upgrade. Just $15 a month is probably particularly useful for a smaller library. You can upgrade when you log into Edelweiss, you'll see that. You'll see there's at the top of your page now. It will say update to premium or something like that. We just changed the wording. It used to say upgrade, but either way, it's an orange button. And if you click that, it doesn't make you upgrade immediately. You can go and see what the options are like and how to sign up. And right away, when you upgrade it, you will notice that every title you look at is going to have this green bar across the top of it. You can actually hide the green bar if you don't feel like seeing it when you're doing things where it doesn't matter. But otherwise, you're going to see this green bar, and it will show you in percentage terms, which is something that we've used for a long time for our analytics tools. Is one of the measures we use in aggregate. So we're pulling together this data, and we're saying, for example, in this title, that 53% of bookstores have sold this book, and that 40% of them have it, 5% of them have it on order. So it gives you a good idea of the breadth, not the actual numbers that they've sold, which probably wouldn't be all that meaningful anyway, but it gives you a sense of how widely spread sales are. And also you can see that there's a time frame associated with that. So I'll show you that in the next slide. And this also switches between two different markets. I guess I'm putting quotes, not really markets. They're actually sort of peer groups. So one of the peer groups is the independent bookstores, and the other one is public libraries. So you can change that. That little icon that looks like a house is, well, it should look like a shop, looks like a store. There's another version that looks more like a library. So you can switch between them and see kind of, and those words will change. So instead of saying sold at 75% of stores, it would say circed at 75% of libraries, or whatever that corresponding percentage is for that book. Unlikely to be the exact same number. And then, yeah, in fact, it shows you right here. So that lets you zero in on the popular titles. So you can see, for example, that this one has been checked out in 28% of libraries. And I know you can really, you can sort of use these tools to, so not just that you're going to happen across a book and say, oh, that's been checked out at 28% of libraries. That's interesting. Which you may, but a more organized approach might be that you're looking for particular titles. So you're a YA librarian, for example, and you just want to focus on those titles or a subset of those titles. Or you're a collection development management manager, and you have a sense that, or you know that you need to increase circulation in a certain piece of the collection. That may be, there may be a lot of things to read first, but once you've done that, you know you need to fill in some gaps. And it may not be in an area of your expertise, so you need to kind of, you could spend a lot of time reading about which books to add to that, but you could also just go right here, filter for the group of titles you're looking at for the certain subject area, and then sort by that. So sort by the percentage checked out, the percentage on order, and right immediately you get the #1 title. So you can kind of quickly scan through and see what you may not have. So like I said, I think it's most librarians, I know bookstore owners are the same as well. People know their books, their collections, and their bookstores super well, and they know they know a lot about what's likely to sell, about what they think is selling, what isn't. But the reality is you really just can't know all of that in your head. And there's certain, like I said, there's certain things, like maybe manga is challenging for you. You may not know enough about it to really keep on top of what's new and what's interesting, or what will be popular, or what already is popular. So it just kind of gives you an extra tool so that you've got more time for spending on other things the library needs to have done. And maybe on the macro picture of what's going on in the collection overall.
In a sense, it's a lot like crowdsourcing your purchasing. You're making those decisions based on another level of information that wasn't previously available. And I always like to say that I've never made a poor decision based on having more information, and I think that's kind of the idea behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's well said. And also, actually, from that, something else I wanted to make sure to point out is that if you are a library that works a lot from just looking at publications and what are the top books in this area, you can certainly do that. And I know that's one of the sources that lots of people use, but I think the real advantage with Edelweiss is there's two things. One is just that depth of information. So there's a lot of information about the title. There's a lot of reviews from your peers. There's metadata, tons of metadata. There's information from the publisher about how they're positioning a book. So that's also one of those places where you just have more information, and that can't be a bad thing. But also because you can kind of filter and drill down to really specific groups of titles, that you just are not going to see you're not going to see a top selling list of gardening books for the Rocky Mountains, or top selling list of some other subcategory of a subcategory of a subcategory. But you can do that with Edelweiss, and you can also say, well, I don't just want to see top selling list of this category. Maybe I also know that I need some large print in this category. So then you could add that to your filter and then see what is out there and what's circling. But anyway, this one I wanted to talk about on order in particular. So I've talked about how you can fill in gaps a little bit. So if you're looking to add titles to a collection, they don't need to be new titles. They may be strong backlist titles, or titles in a particular topic that you realize you're weak on. But when it comes to brand new titles that are coming out, I think this retailer data is really, really interesting and important because we're getting this information from these 600 odd stores in the United States about what they have on order before books come out. And these stores are ordering books with publishers often far, far in advance, at least 6 months. And they're working with the publisher as things change, as realities of politics change, or as the marketing changes or something. Richard Russo gets a lot more publicity for his book pre-pub. So that number is, like Joe said, it's kind of a crowdsourced number, but book buyers, independent bookstores are probably the people that get the most information about books that are coming out because they work with the publishers. And it's not just a marketing job in the publishers. I mean, part of it is they're marketing the book to the whole country, but because of that, it also means that you're going to have demand. So the publisher is creating that demand in the marketplace that your patrons are going to want to see. So the buyers know, they kind of understand that this is this publisher. They tend to typically do very well with these kinds of books. And my sales rep says she's read it and she loved it. And the sales rep, in the case of book selling, because they can do returns, it's almost a consignment business. The sales reps are not motivated to really oversell things too much. They want to get those books out into the market, but they're in a way they're kind of renting space for a while, because if they don't sell, they're going to come back. So there's a really interesting relationship between publisher sales reps and bookstores. So I think that number is very helpful. So if you're looking to find out what's coming out, and I think if you're factoring in this on order quantity, it's going to be this on order percentage. I think that's a very useful piece of information. Of course, you're going to know, I mean, everybody says, if it's easy peasy for the big things, you know what you're going to do, how many to get for Patterson or whatever. And there's those authors that are kind of going to be the same and behave the same every time. But there's so many other things that are not like that. There's debut authors, there's obscure categories, and so on. And also, just to kind of get back to that point about being able to filter down to a very small group, one of the key features that's available for everybody in Edelweiss actually is that you can create these saved filters, and you can see in this example, there's one that says forthcoming at LGBTQ, and that's one that I made by kind of combining some categories and then also making them forthcoming titles. So only things that are coming out at a future date of some kind. Because if I want to increase the size of or increase the representation of those titles, and I'm not buying enough new, then this is again another way to do it and utilize that bookstore or the library on order information. So the saved filters, even though it's not a feature per se of Alpine, if you're familiar with them, or even if you're not, I would take a look at those, because you can do an awful lot with saved filters, and you can save them. That's why they're called saved filters, which means that you can just always invoke them in all kinds of places in Edelweiss. You can go to the list of titles and then say, apply my save filter to this list of titles, and then you get that, and you can have as many of those as you want as well. So that's that's the green bar and the data piece of it, which is, I think, pretty huge. The other, well, there's two other pieces to it that you get as part of Alpine. One of them is just kind of an increased awareness of publishers of you, because what you're going to be in this group that We call them affiliations internally at Edelweiss, but they're essentially groups of people that are users of Edelweiss. And some of them are done through organizations that we work with and in various ways, but the only one we have for librarians is through the analytics group. So the people that already use our Summit version or already use Alpine are in that group. So they're kind of, or you would be kind of validated in a sense for the publishers. They know you're a real librarian and that you are probably interested in collection development and in new title acquisition at some level. So they are more inclined, and we are actually encouraging them, fairly active, and they're very open to this, but they are more inclined to, when they see this analytics, the decal that would be associated with your name when you make a request for something. In fact, you can see this is something you probably don't usually see. This is one of the ways that a publisher sees those requests. So when you make a request, it shows the name and your profile and so on, and then they can approve or decline, but hopefully they're pretty good already about approving librarians. But they can also whitelist, so they can make the decision to say, you know what, this person can, because she's in this analytics group, we'll whitelist them for everything. And they can even whitelist that whole group. So we're working with those publishers. They're really interested in this idea and are keen to kind of whitelist more people. So we're saying it will give you a little bit of an advantage. So it kind of raises your profile with those publishers. Presumably will give you more access. We can't guarantee that, but should give you a bit more access to DRCs. And then you're sort of the same user group. You're going to be in this affiliation that will show up in a few other places in Edelweiss too. And one of them will be, for example, in reviews. So if you go into the reviews page, again, you'll see the green bar and those titles, but you'll also be connected with everybody else in that affiliation. So all those other Alpine users, all the other Summit users. I know we do have an affiliation that anybody can join that's just called all Edelweiss users, but that's just kind of, I mean, that exists, but it's just anybody who wants to be in that group. And this is a bit more of a club, I suppose you could say. So you're more likely to see reviews of people that are like you, so more collection development people. And be able to get their expertise too. And that's a big piece of Edelweiss, is just having that information about people liking a book and reviewing a book and having access to that kind of shared wisdom. So just a couple of case studies, well, use cases maybe, with Alpine. So we have this one here, we call her Lan because she works here. So we have someone who works here called Lan, but she's not. So in this world, she's a collection development librarian. And what she could do is more quickly identifying forthcoming titles to purchase. So we've talked about this already. She might be using Edelweiss to hone in on areas of the library, or maybe not Edelweiss, maybe using depending if she doesn't have Summit, she may be just honing in on some part of the library they know needs some work. So she's saying to her team, we're going to weed this section, and then we're going to replace it with some newer, fresher titles. So that might be her as a management role, but she can do that directly, or she can work with her team to do that, and they're parts of the collection. Also, one of the things that and this is something that booksellers do all the time, is that if you do identify things to purchase, to fill in gaps or forthcoming titles, whatever they are, you can put them on a list, put them on an order essentially, and then export that to a file and very quickly convert that to a selection list on iPage or into Title Source with Baker & Taylor or 360. So we've got ways to export that data very easily. So you can use it to connect fairly well with your wholesaler as well. So like I said, so filling in the gaps in the collection, maybe confirming some weeding decisions by comparing to the activity. Because the other side of this too is that if you're unsure about whether something if the demand has really truly died, you may realize it's really truly died at your library, but maybe it should be in a different part of the library. It's not in the right area, it's not in the right section for whatever reason, or maybe it could be merchandised in a different merchandise, put out on a display of some kind for a particular season or event. And if you look up a book like that and discover that it is actually circulating with some of your peers or selling at bookstores, it might stop you from reading it. On the other hand, if you find out not at all, it's not doing anything anywhere, then that helps confirm your decision as well.
I think
the other use case. Oh, sorry, carry on.
It's okay. One of the great truths of the book industry or the book world itself is that the books just kind of never really stop coming. I mean, it's so having that that weeding eye, but then also having an eye for that new, fresh stuff, and just kind of keeping that collection interesting for your patrons is key. As you know, that's an important and difficult job, I think.
Yeah. So this other person is Angela. She's a YA librarian, and she works on Reader's Advisory. She makes lists of things. So she's using Alpine to do a few things, sort of hone in that affiliation and see what reviews are available and help her decide on YA titles to take in. Kind of the opposite of the weeding thing, like sort of seeing that something in a series or something is maybe not series is a bad example, but making sure that what her instincts are about a particular new title or particular title that they don't have, whether they're validated by what's happening in bookstores and in other libraries. And of course, she's creating lists. You can use Edelweiss, regardless of Alpine or not, for creating lists of titles really easily. You can use a tag just to toss a tag. Anybody at the library can tag books. When you can share those tags, and everybody can create lists, download PDFs of books and so on that you've tagged. So in her case, she's doing that kind of thing, actually making lists, comparing it to the demand and so on. And also she, of course, really likes to read YA. So she's got access to all those YA galleys, and hopefully she has slightly better access because she's an Alpine user, but she would have some of that access already.
And you can also...
Anything to say?
Yeah, you can quite literally create lists of recommendations for patrons. So you can, create these customized lists of titles that you're really excited about, or that you and your team are excited about, and then print them out in a PDF form that's kind of nice and pretty looking, and you can post that around, or make sure that your other colleagues know about those titles and that sort of thing. So you can kind of output that list as well.
Yeah, exactly. And they have covers and everything. So I know that seems kind of, covers, but it's helpful to see a list with covers actually, because people walking past it will recognize those books. All right, so I'm going to move on a little bit to the other products to give you an idea of what those are. I won't spend tons of time on it because this is not a sales pitch for them, but just so you know what's what and what the differences are. So that was Alpine. Let's talk about Basecamp a little bit. It's actually going to be a very little bit because it's still under development, as I think I mentioned earlier. It's going to be released later this year. The key thing to know about Basecamp, though, is that the big difference with it is your ILS data would be integrated into Edelweiss. So you would see things like this, for example. If you're looking at titles, you would have some kind of indicator to show that you already have this title. We also do a lot of work with grouping titles together by the work, by the family. So we wouldn't recommend titles where you have the hardcover and the new paperback is coming out and so on. But we would show you when you have something, and more importantly, maybe when you don't have something. So if you're using the tools, and that would include the Alpine percentages and stuff. So you would be looking at, 80% of bookstores have sold this in the last month, for example, and we do not appear to have this book. And it looks like something that would completely fit for our library. So if you need some quick wins, it's a lot easier when you can tell what you do and don't have. You'd be able to sort and search, and kind of in this example here, showing the owned, not owned as a filter. or as a refinement, actually, technically is what we call it. So if you're looking at a big list, you could just refine for the things that you don't own, for example. So Basecamp will be a collection of things like that, kind of baked into the regular part of Edelweiss, more access to the data that we have, but also that combination with your own ILS data. And like I mentioned earlier, we're working with many of the ILS vendors. So for most of you, it should be relatively straightforward to participate in that. And another piece, this is kind of a new thing, but I've added it into this presentation because it's something we're kind of excited about right now, which is not really a product per se, or we don't exactly know, I suppose, at this point. But one thing we're working on now is an alternate version of all of this, which is instead of you going to a tool to look at, what's happening, what's circulating, what's not circulating, what your ILS has, what you don't have, stepping out of that for a bigger picture that's more of a report. So we're working on a reporting system that will take that ILS data. So if you're sending it to us either for Basecamp or for Summit or for a one-off report like this, we're going to be able to provide people with something like this, which is, we're calling it state of the collection report at the moment. So it will, in some of our terminology that we use for our analytics, will give you insight into the various parts of the collection, the freshness of them, relevance, and so on. I'm going to, well, I can talk about these a little bit. So for example, freshness is essentially the strength of circulation. And this is benchmarking against other libraries in the group. So below, above average, for example. Relevance is kind of those key titles, the top titles that are doing well. How many of those titles do you have currently? Do you have a lot of gaps that are things that other libraries have, for example? So you could say, well, maybe the collection is looking fairly good, but we're sort of missing out on some of the key titles. So your relevance may be low. And then efficiency is one that's not filtered. We don't have a value for it in this sample, but efficiency is referring to really efficiency and success of purchasing. So you may have heard of people talk about DOA reports. So you buy, for new books, you buy all these hundreds of new books you choose every year, hundreds and thousands. And there's going to be some percentage of those books that just do not do anything. They do not move off the shelf. So they're dead in arrival, essentially, or they were. At some point, they hit a time where you could say they're dead in arrival. So efficiency is kind of a score around that kind of thing, like success of purchasing. And then finally, the last one on that is turnover, which is really just showing you a value for overall is the collection, what is the turnover like at the collection in this case? And the whole collection is 3.4, meaning that each book, I mean, on average, each book has circulated 3.4 times in a year, which for a library would be quite a lot. But this is just kind of the very, very, very high level at the front page of this. This would be a very long report that would include much more detail about each genre and how they stack up in these kinds of metrics. So there's one, I've just included one page from here, which is specifically on turnover. So this is showing you breaking out the genres in terms of which genres have turned better or worse compared to the peer group. So there's one genre that's significantly above average, and that's Bibles. So, turnover being high is great, but it also means that you could make the Bible section a little bit bigger and add some different Bibles, I suppose. And then there's all these ones that are turning relatively well too. Of course, things like, romance and travel, YA, some of the things you'd expect. And then down at the other end, there's, the average ones. And down at the other end, you've got, fiction, humor, house and home being a moderately below typical kind of turnover at other libraries. So it could be that your fiction collection is just that bit too big, could be weeded out a bit. Or maybe that's just something you know about your library and you accept, and that's fine. But this report will give you will slice and dice that information in lots of different ways. So if you're looking for places to pinpoint and work on, it will give you a starting point. And what we're planning to do is be able to give that on a periodic basis, say every month or every quarter, whatever would make sense, so that you can track whether there are improvements over time. So it's something you could use for reporting to a board, for example, or or to make your, as you improve the collection over time, then use it to show that you've done that. Oops, double clicked. So that is Basecamp and the reporting, kind of one-off reporting that we're planning. Summit is a real thing that exists now. And actually, I should go back to, if you are interested in that reporting, like I said, we're at the point of launching it. So just let us know if that sounds as something that you'd be interested in, and we might just test it on you. All right, so the Summit version is, we call it kind of the full, in quotes, version of Edelweiss Analytics. All the best bells and whistles, and really all the pie charts, actually. And I'll show you what I mean by all the pie charts in a minute. We've actually had a Summit version for over 3 years, but we've made some enhancements and actually built it into the, if you've been using Edelweiss for a while, you know that we went through a transition last year from an older version of Edelweiss that looked quite different to the current Edelweiss Plus version. So our analytics kind of came with that, and we rewrote a lot of that and reimagined how it looked. So it's very different from the way it was a few years ago. And it's fully integrated. And like I said before, obviously you need to get ILS data in there, and the whole point of it is to make things, make more use of your time as a collection person, to get out there and do more with your patrons than spend all time trying to figure out what's going on with the collection. So it does give you a lot of that big picture stuff that I was showing you in the reporting, but it's dynamic. So you can go in there every day and have a look at that big picture and see, for example, over time of this month versus last month, how's the fiction doing now? Since I weeded a whole bunch of stuff, it should, the turnover should look better instantly because of that. Is the YA collection trending upwards in circulation, downwards? Can I drill down into a very specific subcategory of YA and see how that's doing? What's outperforming what's trending up, down? Where are the opportunities to make space and replace with better titles, well, or more popular titles, I should say? What could we weed? Specifically, what could you weed? With the Summit version, you can actually just say, I want to kind of take this part of the collection, and I want to know which titles are outdated. I want to know which titles are worn because they've circulated so many times. And you can really quickly punch out reports that will give you lists of titles. I mean, you can see the report, and then you can actually convert those to a PDF with barcode that you can just go to the stack, see what you have, find those things, scan them out. And I'm actually going to show you a bit of this. We've just been changing it, and I think it's pretty cool. So I'd like to show you something live. And then, so a lot of this is around comparison. So you saw that, I mean, the sort of basis of what we do is this comparison of your library's collection to other collections, to the collections in aggregate, and also to the sales and holdings in aggregate. But the Summit version brings you a lot closer to that. So you can do things like compare your branches to each other. So you could say, for gardening, which branch is circulating the highest, and which one has, and really comparing by turnover too. So which ones are turning over a lot higher than the others? Where's our opportunity to maybe move some books from one branch to another? Because it has potential to really help with floating collections, or just with rebalancing in general, like we're identifying which branches are strong in which kinds of topic areas, or which ones are poor, but maybe not because that's a bad topic for that branch, but because you just don't really have the right books for that branch. And then, so there's also more direct comparisons with the peer group of other libraries, where you can actually say, I want to compare my collection of gardening books to the gardening books at this other library. in my state or another library that seems like a similar size or a similar demographic, and then see what they're doing well with. You can ignore the things that they're not circing, but for the things that they're circing, what do they have that you don't? And there's another source of information and new titles to bring in. So there's a ton of comparison things. So I'll move on to actually show you kind of what it looks like. So this example is a part of the main analytics page, and there are the pie charts. So we slice and dice things in a few different ways. I won't spend a long time going through all of these, but a big piece of it is kind of like being really clear about a group of titles and how they are doing your library. So for example, right now I'm looking at a filter for mystery thriller at the top, and I'm looking at the top 100 selling titles in that genre. It could be a much smaller genre. It could be a lot more titles. And then within that, for example, I can tell the red piece of pie are the things that I don't have. So it's a very quick way to get to that, what's doing well that we don't have in this genre. And then you can put things on lists and order them and so on. Same thing for the next one is really about forthcoming titles. And then the third one is about your collection. So it's got nothing to do with comparing to anybody else. It's looking at how is this chunk of your collection doing, which ones are the freshest in that they're circulating, which ones are the stalest. Could be a shortcut into weeding if you want to just do something about excess titles in this category, for example. And then below that is a sort of bigger picture of trends. So you can see for mystery thriller, for the last 3 months, you can actually get a summary of the average holdings and the circulations and the turns, which is 2.82. But then these are showing you overall trends. So in your holdings, in your circulation, so you can see year over year, up to 3 or 4 years, depending how much data we have for you. So you can kind of see that things changing over time in this category. You can look at that for the overall numbers, whatever chunk you like. And then we also this gets into some of the comparisons. That first one, that grid is a location comparison, kind of showing for mystery, which branches. We've got the branches kind of, they're very generic named branches like main, west, south, east, and north. So the main branch is the one that is in the red, essentially. So it's got lots of units and and not lots of circulation. It would be considered very overstocked in the context of comparing to your other branches. This is not at this point comparing to the rest of the world. Then category comparison within this branch or across all branches, you have the choice. Which categories within mystery, so the sub-mystery, which ones are overstocked, which ones are understocked. Right now we've got it set to collection codes, which is really only at the top level, only print and audio. So you can see the print is over, audio is under, and I could drill down into the next level within print to find where the worst offenders are and think about weeding that section. And then this is where I'm looking at comparing to that very last one, peer comparison, comparing our collection of mystery to somebody else's collection of mystery. What do they have that we don't, that might be interesting for us to take a look at? And then, like I mentioned, the very last thing I wanted to talk about was the weeding in there. The weeding tool is very cool, and this is what it actually looks like as well. And this is one where I'm going to attempt to switch windows. And there we go. This is it in real life, actually on the page in analytics. So you can basically make multiple profiles. So you can have a profile that's called excess copies. In this case, it's a weeding profile with these settings. So it says, I'm looking for things that I would consider poorly circulating for this profile to be 18 months out of date, or 18 months with no checkouts, I should say. Worn, I consider to be at least 15 checkouts, and outdated, 15 years since pub date, or 5 years since we've had it. And then for this one is the excess, it gets to the excess copies, is the number of copies. So for a lot of weeding, you might just be, what do we need to weed? And it will suggest a lot of things. But if you say, I want to weed things where there's at least 3 copies on the shelf, then you know you're not having to make a decision about getting rid of anything, any one title entirely. You can just bring it down to 1 if you're queasy about getting rid of a book altogether. And also, it's just kind of the low-hanging fruit. Like, these are things that haven't circed or they're worn, and there's lots of copies of them. So why are they taking up all this space, right? So, and you can even dig into them when you get the results for this. I only got 9 for that, but it will show you the rationale, like how many of those criteria they meet. And these ones are, the first couple are meeting all 3 of those criteria. And then you can kind of, if you just want to see the 4 titles that are potentially worn, you can see those. If you just want to see the 3 poorly circulating, but this will work for, you know, thousands and thousands of titles. But the cool thing, I think, is that you can tweak these and then bring it down. So if you're looking at, in this case, I've got this filter called YA Terrors, which is all the categories in YA, like vampires and werewolves and stuff like that all together. But so I'm taking my, what was I going to say? I've got my filter and applying it to this group, but it could be a much bigger filter, or it could be that I know that I want to get rid of at least 100 units out of here. So I would tweak these and say, okay, let's get more aggressive, or less aggressive in this case, with the poorly circulating, and make that, set that to, you know, 30 months instead, because I've got to get more things out of there. And this will all run, again, real time, and give you not a whole lot more difference, apparently. So, but you get the idea. So you can kind of tweak that until you get to 100 units being recommended, and then go out and pull those 100 units. So I think that's a sort of revision of the earlier version of the weeding we had that I think is quite nice. So let me just switch back over to the copy of it. So just in summary at the end here, we do have some time for questions. If Joe has been monitoring the questions, if there's anything that would make sense to answer now, we can do that. Do you have anything, Joe?
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, there were actually 2 questions. Let me dig them up here real quick. One of them was simply, does the Summit version work well with Polaris? Oh,
okay. Yes, Polaris is one of the systems that we have a really good integration with. There's some, they have that Simply Reports module, I think it's called, where people go in and they can do a one-time setup of the Polaris reporting, and then it will send to us, I think, every night from then on. So yeah, Polaris is an easy one.
Cool. And then that actually segues into the next question as well, which was how fresh is the data, which we did cover a little bit, but
yeah, I mean, it is. We don't include any data. Like if somebody stops sending us a data or they're not on the system anymore, we don't include that. So it's very fresh, and we've got most of our stores and libraries sending us data every day. We've got a handful that send it to us every week, but basically it's current, and we process that as it comes in. It's live on the site the next morning. So very, I guess, is the answer to that.
Very fresh.
And then of course the book content is very fresh too, because we're getting constant updates from publishers as well. Right.
Yeah, so if that's worth mentioning too, like if they change the price or the page count or the cover or something like that, they put that up on Edelweiss immediately, because this is the tool that they use to sell to everybody, basically. The wholesalers use Edelweiss to order for the warehouses. It's just where the publishing world sells their books, basically.
Yeah, so it's important to them. Do you have anything else to add, Joe?
I don't.
Okay. All right, well, thanks so much, everyone, for coming. I appreciate your time, and there will be a recording of this out on our help site with all of our other recorded webinars, so if you want to share it with your colleagues, feel free to do that. Thanks.